Ha comenzado ya la retransmisión del anuncio de Jeremy Hunt, el canciller británico, en la Cámara de los Comunes, de ese anuncio del esperado plan fiscal, del ansiado plan fiscal. Vamos a conectar ya con Jeremy Hunt para ver qué es lo que está diciendo el canciller.
And eats away at the trust upon which a strong society is built. The Office for Budget Responsibility confirms global factors are the primary cause of current inflation. Most countries are still dealing with the fallout from a once-in-a-century pandemic. The furlough scheme, the vaccine rollout, and the response of the NHS did our country proud, but they all have to be paid for. The lasting impact on supply chains has made goods more expensive and fueled inflation, and this has been worsened by a
Bueno, estamos escuchando cómo Jeremy Hunt está hablando de la pandemia, de los efectos que ha tenido sobre la economía del Reino Unido. Y ojo, porque también tenemos ya declaraciones más concretas sobre el plan fiscal. Dice que sus prioridades son la estabilidad, el crecimiento y los servicios públicos, y además ha dicho que van a tomar decisiones difíciles para poder combatir la inflación. Además, Jeremy Hunt ha dicho que su plan va a llevarles a una reducción, a una recesión menor dentro de la economía del Reino Unido y a un mayor crecimiento a largo plazo. Vamos a seguir escuchando lo que está diciendo Jeremy.
The Bank of England, which has done an outstanding job since its independence, now has my wholehearted support in its mission to defeat inflation, and I today confirm we will not change its remit. But we need fiscal and monetary policy to work together.
Bueno, está hablando Jeremy Hunt del Banco de Inglaterra y dice que tiene todo su apoyo en su lucha para combatir la inflación, pero que también hacen falta medidas fiscales, así que vamos a seguir escuchando.
British families make sacrifices every day to live within their means, and so too must their government, because the United Kingdom will always pay its way. I understand the motivation of my predecessor's mini budget, and he was correct. He was correct to identify growth as a priority. But unfunded tax cuts are as risky as unfunded spending, which is why we reversed the planned measures. As a result, government borrowing has fallen, the pound has strengthened.
Está hablando Jeremy Hunt de cómo desde que Kwasi Kwarteng, su antecesor, publicó ese plan fiscal, desde entonces, desde que ya se ha ido Kwasi Kwarteng, dice Jeremy Hunt que la libra se ha fortalecido y está a punto ya de empezar a dar los datos de su plan fiscal. Vamos a seguir escuchando.
To bring it down, including a rock-solid commitment to rebuild our public finances. Richard Hughes and his team at the OBR today lay out starkly the impact of global headwinds on the UK economy, and I'm enormously grateful to him and his team for their thorough work. The OBR forecast the UK's inflation rate to be 9.1% this year and 7.4% next year. They confirm that our actions today help inflation to fall sharply from the middle of next year. They also judge that the UK, like other countries, is now in recession. Overall this year, the economy is still forecast to grow by 4.2%. GDP then falls in 2023 by 1.4%, before rising by 1.3%, 2.6%, and 2.7% in the following 3 years. The OBR says higher energy prices explain the majority of the downward revision in cumulative growth since March. They also expect a rise in unemployment from 3.6% today to 4.9% in 2024, before falling to 4.1%. Today's decisions mean that over the next 5 years, borrowing is more than halved. This year, we're forecast to borrow 7.1% of GDP, or £177 billion. Next year, 5.5% of GDP, or £140 billion. Then by 2027-28, it falls to 2.4% of GDP, or £69 billion. As a result, underlying debt as a percentage of GDP starts to fall from a peak of 97.6% in 2025-6 to 97.3% in 27-28. I also confirmed two new fiscal rules. The first is that underlying debt must fall as a percentage of GDP by the 5th year of a rolling 5-year period. The second, that public sector borrowing over the same period must be below 3% of GDP. And the plan I'm announcing today meets both rules. Today's statement delivers a consolidation of £55 billion and means inflation and interest rates end up significantly lower. We achieve this, Mr. Speaker, in a balanced way. In the short term, as growth slows and unemployment rises, we will use fiscal policy to support the economy. The OBR confirm that because of our plans, the recession is shallower and inflation is reduced. Unemployment is also lower, with about 70,000 jobs saved as a result of our decisions today. Then, once growth returns, we increase the pace of consolidation to get debt falling. This further reduces the pressure on the bank to raise interest rates, because as Conservatives, we do not leave our debts to the next generation. Mr. Speaker, this is a balanced path to stability, tackling inflation to reduce the cost of living and protect pensioner savings whilst supporting the economy on a path to growth. But it means taking difficult decisions. Anyone who says there are easy answers is not being straight with the British people. Some argue for spending cuts, but that would not be compatible with high-quality public services. Others say savings should be found by increasing taxes, but Conservatives know that high-tax economies damage enterprise and erode freedom. We want low taxes and sound money, but Conservatives know sound money has to come first, because inflation eats away at the pound in people's pockets even more insidiously than taxes. So with just under half of the £55 billion consolidation coming from tax and just over half from spending, this is a balanced plan for stability. I turn first to our decisions on tax. I have tried to be fair by following two broad principles. Firstly, we ask those with more to contribute more. And secondly, we avoid the tax rises that damage growth. Although my decisions today do lead to a substantial tax increase, we have not raised headline rates of taxation, and tax as a percentage of GDP will increase by just 1% over the next 5 years. I start with personal taxes. Asking more from those who have more means that the first difficult decision I take on tax is to reduce the threshold at which the 45p rate becomes payable from £150,000 to £125,140. Those earning £150,000 or more will pay just over £1,200 more in tax every year. We're also taking difficult decisions on tax-free allowances. I'm maintaining at current levels the income tax personal allowance, higher rate threshold, main national insurance thresholds, and the inheritance tax thresholds for a further 2 years, taking us to April 2028. Even after that, we'll still have the most generous set of tax-free allowances of any G7 country. I'm also reforming allowances on unearned income. The dividend allowance will be cut from £2,000 to £1,000 next year, and then to £500 from April 24. The annual exempt amount for capital gains tax will be cut from £12,300 to £6,000 next year, and then £3,000 from April 24. These changes still leave us with more generous allowances than countries like Germany, Ireland, France, and Canada. Because the OBR forecast half of all new vehicles will be electric by 2025, to make our motoring tax system fairer, I've decided that from then, electric vehicles will no longer be exempt from vehicle excise duty. Company car tax rates will remain lower for electric vehicles, and I've listened to industry bodies and will limit rate increases to 1 percentage point a year for 3 years from 2025. The OBR expects housing activity to slow over the next 2 years. So the stamp duty cuts announced in the mini budget will remain in place, but only until 30.
Bueno, pues ya estamos escuchando ahí a Jeremy Hunt. Vamos a hacer un pequeño repaso de lo que está diciendo ahora mismo el canciller británico. Ha dicho que ese plan fiscal tiene un valor de 155.000 millones de libras. Dice que, entre otras cosas, bueno, pues es una forma de tener un plan bastante equilibrado. Dice que menos de la mitad de esas 55.000 millones de libras van a venir por el lado de la subida de los impuestos y un poco más de la mitad por el recorte de los gastos que tiene el gobierno. Además, ha dicho, por ejemplo, entre otras cosas, que la inflación realmente se come una mayor parte de nuestro poder adquisitivo de lo que lo hacen los impuestos y así pues intenta justificar lo que están haciendo en el lado fiscal en el Reino Unido. Entre sus decisiones, bueno, pues, por ejemplo, subir ese umbral de los impuestos, del impuesto de la renta de las personas físicas, el IRPF, que dice que va a reducir, el umbral más alto, que ahora mismo pues solo pagan aquellos que reciben al año más de 150.000 libras. Ahora van a pagar ese 45% de IRPF todo el que reciba más de 125.000 libras. Son algunas de las principales medidas que ha puesto en marcha ahora Jeremy Hunt con ese plan fiscal, pero también ha hablado de las previsiones económicas que va a lanzar hoy la Oficina de Responsabilidad Presupuestaria. Entre otras cosas, ha confirmado que tenemos recesión en el Reino Unido, efectivamente, que ahora está en recesión, igual que otros países, también ha dicho. Y bueno, entre las estimaciones que ha hecho la Oficina de Responsabilidad Fiscal para el PIB del Reino Unido de cara a los próximos meses e incluso años, pues dice que para 2022 el crecimiento estimado va a ser del 4,2% en comparación con el 3,8% que había estimado en marzo, que para 2023 crecerá un 1,4% y en 2024 un 1,3%. Será entonces cuando alcancen el menor nivel de crecimiento en estas estimaciones, porque a partir de 2025 empezarían de nuevo a crecer con un 2,5 o 2,6% de crecimiento en el caso del 2025, 2026, ahí estarían en un crecimiento del 2,7%. Vamos a volver a escuchar a Jeremy Hunt, que sigue hablando en esos momentos.
And recognize the cyclical nature of energy businesses. So, taking account of this, I've decided that from January the 1st until March 28, we will increase the energy profits levy from 25 to 35%. The structure of our energy market also creates windfall profits for low-carbon electricity generation. So from January the 1st, we've decided to introduce a new temporary 45% levy on electricity generators. Together, these measures raise £14 billion next year. Finally, I turn to business rates. It's an important principle that bills should accurately reflect market values. So we'll proceed with the revaluation of business properties from April 23. But I will soften the blow on businesses with a nearly £14 billion tax cut over the next 5 years. Nearly 2/3 of properties will not pay a penny more next year, and thousands of pubs, restaurants, and small high street shops will benefit. This will include a new government-funded transitional relief scheme, as called for by the CBI, the British Retail Consortium, the Federation of Small Businesses, and others, benefiting around 700,000 businesses. Mr. Speaker, our plan for the cost of living delivers lower inflation, lower mortgage rates, a shallower downturn, and lower unemployment. But it also involves public spending discipline. So I turn next to how we protect public services through a challenging period. The Prime Minister's vision for this country has at its heart a strong NHS and world-class education. We know that a strong economy depends on strong public services, so we will protect them as much as we can as we deliver our plan for stability and growth. We do have to take difficult decisions on public finances, so we're going to grow public spending, but we're going to grow it more slowly than the growth in the economy. For the remaining 2 years of the spending review, we'll protect the increases in departmental budgets we've already set out in cash terms, and then grow resource spending at 1% a year in real terms in the 3 years that follow. Although departments will have to make efficiencies to deal with inflationary pressures in the next 2 years, this decision means overall spending in public services will continue to rise in real terms for the next 5 years. Before I turn to our plan for schools and the NHS, I start with 2 other areas of spending. The Department for Work and Pensions has a critical role in of around 630,000 people since the start of the pandemic. Employment levels have yet to return to pre-pandemic levels, which is bad for businesses who cannot fill vacancies and bad for people missing out on the opportunity to do well for themselves and their families. So the Prime Minister has asked the Work and Pensions Secretary to do a thorough review of issues holding back workforce participation to conclude early in the new year. Alongside this, I am also committed to helping people already in work to raise their incomes, progress in work, and become financially independent. So we will ask over 600,000 more people on universal credit to meet with a work coach so that they can get the support they need to increase their hours or earnings. I've also decided to move back the managed transition of people from employment and support allowance onto universal credit to 2028, and will invest an extra £280 million in DWP to crack down on benefit fraud and error over the next 2 years. And the government's review of the state pension age will also be published in early 2023. Our security at home depends on our security overseas. So I turn next to defence and other international commitments. The privilege of being this country's Foreign Secretary showed me firsthand the enormous respect in which this country is held, because the United Kingdom is and has always been a force for good in the world. Nothing sums that up more than the courage of our armed forces, men and women who risk their lives every day in defence of our territory and our belief in freedom. Alongside them, I salute the citizens of another country right on the front line of that fight today, the brave people of Ukraine. Yeah. The United Kingdom has given them military support worth £2.3 billion since the start of Putin's invasion, the second highest contribution in the world after the United States, which demonstrates that our commitment to democracy and open societies remains steadfast. In that context, the Prime Minister and I both recognise the need to increase defence spending. But before we make that commitment, it's necessary to revise and update the integrated review written as it was before the Ukraine invasion. And I've asked for that vital work to be completed ahead of the next budget, and to today confirm we will continue to maintain the defence budget at least 2% of GDP to be consistent with our NATO commitment. Another important international commitment is to overseas aid. The OBR's forecasts show a significant shock to public finances, so it won't be possible to return to the 0.7% target until the fiscal situation allows. We remain fully committed to that target, and the plans that I've set out today assume that ODA spending will remain around 0.5% for the forecast period. As a percentage of GNI, we were the third highest donor in the G7 last year, and I am proud our aid commitment has saved thousands of lives around the world. So I look forward to working closely with my right honourable friend, the member for Sutton Coldfield, now rightly back in his place in Cabinet, to make sure we continue to play a poverty. The United Kingdom has also been a global leader on climate change, cutting emissions by more than any other G20 country. But with the existential vulnerability we face, now would be the wrong time to step back from our international climate responsibilities. So I also confirm that despite the economic pressures, we remain fully committed to the historic Glasgow Climate Pact agreed at COP26, including a 68% reduction in our own emissions by 2030. I turn to education. Mr. Speaker, being pro-education is being
Bueno, vamos a repasar algunas de las medidas que ya ha avanzado Jeremy Hunt en esta declaración de otoño, en este plan fiscal que acaba de presentar. Por ejemplo, ha hablado también de una de las formas en las que espera recaudar más dinero, concretamente extendiendo el impuesto sobre las ganancias o los beneficios inesperados de las empresas energéticas. Dice que para ello va a recaudar 14.000 millones de libras adicionales. Pero eso sí, dice que ese aumento, esa extensión del impuesto sobre los beneficios extraordinarios de las energéticas realmente va a ser temporal, va a ser desde el 1 de enero hasta el 28 de marzo y que entonces van a aumentar el impuesto a las ganancias energéticas desde el 25 hasta el 35%. Ha dicho también Jeremy Hunt que la estructura de su mercado de la energía crea unas ganancias extraordinarias para la generación de electricidad también, con bajas emisiones de carbono, así que a partir del 1 de enero también van a introducir del 45%, ahí es nada, casi la mitad de los ingresos, de los beneficios irían a parar a las arcas públicas sobre los generadores de electricidad. Dice Jeremy Hunt que en esas medidas en su conjunto van a recaudar un total de 14.000 millones. Recuerden que son medidas que ha dicho Jeremy Hunt que en total van a suponer un ahorro de 55.000 millones de libras. Dice que un poquito menos de la mitad van a venir de lo que está haciendo respecto a los impuestos, que dice que no son subirlos como tal, sino que está creando nuevos, está empezando a introducir, por ejemplo, también impuestos sobre vehículos, impuesto especial sobre vehículos para los vehículos eléctricos, que antes no tenían que pagar ese impuesto, pues ahora a partir de ahora sí que van a tener que pagarlo. Y una de las claves también es que algunos de estos impuestos, algunas de estas reducciones del umbral o algunas introducciones de los impuestos realmente van a entrar en vigor en 2023, es decir, cuando comience ya el año, el 1 de enero. Había muchas personas que consideraban que realmente pues, todo esto iba a empezar a aplicarse a partir de las próximas elecciones, es decir, en 2024. Pero el gobierno de Sunak ha preferido no esperar tanto tiempo un tema electoralista y empezar ya con esas medidas que consideran tan necesarias para el Reino Unido. Vamos a seguir hablando de otras cosas que ha dicho Jeremy Hunt, por ejemplo, también hablando de la deuda y de la financiación realizar desde el gobierno. Dice que este año el Reino Unido va a pedir prestado el 7% o, si lo miramos en términos absolutos, entre 177.000 millones de libras esterlinas. Eso para este año, pero dicen que esa cifra prácticamente pues, va a reducirse hasta la mitad en 2028, de aquí a 5 años, cuando dice que solo van a necesitar unos 70.000 millones de libras de financiación. Dinero prestado. También ha hablado sobre la deuda PIB, ese ratio de deuda PIB, y dice que, entre otras cosas, que ese ratio, esa deuda subyacente como porcentaje del PIB, empieza a caer desde su máximo del 97,6% en 2025-2026 hasta el 97,3% en 2027-2028. Sigue hablando Jeremy Hunt, así que vamos a seguir escuchando lo que está diciendo también.
Put forward a case for a long-term workforce plan. He even wrote a book about it, which I've read. I've listened carefully to his proposals, and I believe they have merit. So the Department of Health and Social Care and the NHS will publish an independently verified plan for the number of doctors, nurses, and other professionals we'll need in 5, 10, and 15 years' time, taking full account of the need for better retention and productivity improvements. I've also listened to extensive representations about the challenges facing the social care sector. It did a heroic job looking after children, disabled adults, and older people during the pandemic. Its 1.6 million employees work incredibly hard. But even outside the pandemic, the increasing number of over 80s is putting massive pressure on their services. I also heard very real concerns from local authorities, particularly about their ability to deliver the DILNOT reforms immediately. So I will delay the implementation of this important reform for 2 years, allocating the funding to allow local authorities to to provide more care packages. I also want the social care system to help free up some of the 13,500
55.000 millones de libras es lo que espera recaudar, lo que espera ahorrar el gobierno británico con este plan fiscal que ha generado tanta expectativa y tanta expectación, desde luego, en torno a lo que iba a suceder en una de las principales economías del mundo. Ya tenemos este plan sobre la mesa. Nosotros despedimos este directo aquí en especial para retransmitirles las palabras de Jeremy Hunt. Nos vamos ya al directo en el canal de Negocios Televisión. Enseguida volvemos con estas declaraciones de Jeremy Hunt, que va a seguir hablando. No se vayan.
next year and £4.7 billion